Michael Johnson was a man people rarely noticed. To most, he was just another face in the long halls of the Defense Department, someone carrying papers, pushing carts, or serving coffee at meetings. His uniform now was not a decorated Navy uniform but a plain white shirt and dark trousers. His shoes were polished but modest, and his head was often lowered as if he wanted to stay invisible. What most people did not know was that Michael had once been part of something bigger than himself. He had served as a Navy SEAL, one of the most respected and dangerous jobs in the military. He had seen battles no one in that room could imagine, carried his brothers through fire, and done things for his country that no newspaper had ever written about. But after he left the service, life had not treated him with the same honor. Michael was a single father now. His wife, Anna, had passed away years ago due to illness, leaving him to raise their daughter, Emily, alone. Emily was only 8 years old, a bright little girl with golden hair and wide blue eyes that always searched for her father's smile. Michael worked long hours, took small jobs, and never complained, because everything he did was for her. She was the reason he woke up each morning, the reason he pushed through his own quiet pain. That morning, the air in Washington, D.C. was crisp and sharp. Michael had woken up before sunrise, as he always did, to make Emily's breakfast and pack her school lunch. He kissed her on the forehead, reminded her to do her homework, and promised he would be home early to read her favorite story. She hugged him tightly before he left. That hug was what gave him strength as he walked into the tall government building where he now worked. Inside, men in suits hurried down the hallways, holding files and talking into phones. Officers in uniform walked with heavy medals pinned to their chests. Michael passed them quietly, holding a silver tray with steaming coffee cups. His steps were careful, steady, as though the tray weighed far more than it really did. He entered the large briefing room. The walls were lined with flags of the nation, the floor polished until it shined, and the long oak table in the center was filled with important people, high-ranking officers, senior advisors, and stern politicians. They were there to discuss matters that could affect millions, but Michael was only there to serve them coffee. He placed the cups down one by one. Some nodded politely. Most did not even glance at him. To them, he was invisible, just part of the furniture of the room. Michael did not mind anymore. He had learned to swallow his pride long ago. The battles he fought now were different, paying rent, keeping food on the table, and making sure Emily had everything she needed. As he adjusted the tray, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Who told you to stand there?" "Move along," said Colonel Harris, a man with a square jaw and a hard expression. His tone was dismissive, as though Michael was no more than a distraction. Michael felt the sting of the words but said nothing. He simply nodded, lowered his eyes, and stepped back toward the corner of the room. He had dealt with worse, much worse, on battlefields oceans away. This was only pride, and pride was something he could endure. Still, as he stood quietly, his mind drifted to Emily. He pictured her small hands coloring at the kitchen table, the way she always waited by the window for him to return home. That thought calmed him, reminded him that this job, no matter how small, was for her. She deserved a safe life, far from the sounds of war he could never forget. The room grew silent as the door opened again. Into the room walked General Laura Adams, one of the highest-ranking women in the military and a legend in her own right. Her presence was powerful, her steps steady, and her eyes sharp with authority. She was known for her discipline, but also for her fairness. When she entered, everyone in the room stood to show respect. Michael, standing with the tray in his hands, quickly stepped aside to make room. He wanted no attention, no recognition. He was used to disappearing in crowds. But as he moved, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows, hitting his hand at just the right angle. On his finger glimmered a heavy silver ring, the Navy SEAL trident, a symbol not many people carried. It was scratched and worn, but still strong, just like the man who wore it. General Adams's eyes caught the light. Her gaze sharpened, and she froze mid-step. She knew that ring. She had seen it on the hands of men who had done the impossible, men who had gone through the hardest training in the world. "Wait," she said suddenly, her voice firm. The room stopped. The advisors and officers looked at her in surprise. Who was she speaking to? Slowly, every head turned toward Michael. Michael's heart skipped. He was not used to being addressed in these rooms. He straightened slightly, though he still held the tray. General Adams took a step closer. Her eyes moved from his face to his hand, studying the ring. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Her tone was not harsh, but commanding, curious. Michael hesitated. For a moment, the years of silence and humility pressed down on him. He wanted to shrug it off, to remain unseen. But then he remembered Emily, how he always told her to stand tall, to be honest, to never hide who she was. Could he do less for himself? He lifted his eyes, his voice quiet but steady. "I earned it, ma'am," he said. The room seemed to hold its breath. The tray in his hand suddenly felt lighter. For the first time in years, someone was not seeing him as the man serving coffee, but as the soldier he once was. And for the first time in a long time, Michael felt seen. The silence in the briefing room was heavy. Every pair of eyes was on Michael Johnson, the man holding the tray of empty coffee cups. A moment earlier he had been invisible, just another aide in a plain shirt. Now, because of one ring and one question, the entire room was waiting for his answer. General Laura Adams stood tall in front of him, her sharp eyes never leaving his. "You said you earned it," she repeated. "Are you telling me you're a SEAL?" Michael gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am, retired." The air shifted. A few officers straightened in their seats. Others exchanged surprised glances. Even Colonel Harris, who had spoken to Michael so sharply, now looked unsettled. It was rare to meet a Navy SEAL, even rarer to discover one hidden in plain sight, carrying coffee instead of medals. General Adams' voice softened slightly, but her curiosity only grew. "What's your name, son?" "Michael Johnson, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady though his chest felt tight. The general studied him for a long moment. To her trained eye, the signs were clear: the calm way he stood, the discipline in his posture, the quiet strength in his voice. This was not just an aide. This was a man who had once been trained to do the impossible. But the rest of the room did not share her focus. One of the senior advisors, Mr. Reynolds, cleared his throat. "General, with respect, we are here to discuss urgent matters. Perhaps we can continue without delay?" General Adams glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "We will," she said firmly. "But first I want to know why a man who wore the trident is serving coffee in this room." Michael's grip tightened slightly on the tray. He did not like attention, not anymore. He had built his life quietly for Emily, far from the eyes of others. To speak of his past in front of these people felt like opening an old wound. Still, something in the general's voice told him she was not asking out of pride or curiosity alone. She truly wanted to know. He cleared his throat. "I served 12 years, ma'am. After my wife passed, I left the teams. My daughter needed me. Civilian life has been different. This job pays the bills." There was nothing dramatic in his tone, only honesty. But those simple words carried weight. The room, so often filled with proud speeches and polished reports, was suddenly silent again. Colonel Harris shifted uncomfortably. He had ordered Michael around only moments earlier, and now he realized the man had once commanded respect that far outweighed his own. General Adams gave a slow nod. 12 years, she repeated. Her voice carried respect now. "And you left not for yourself, but for your family. That says a lot." Michael gave a polite nod, unsure what else to say. He wanted nothing more than to leave the spotlight and finish his duties quietly. Yet at the same time, a small flicker of warmth touched his chest. Someone had finally seen him again, not just the coffee bearer, but the man behind the ring. The meeting continued. General Adams took her seat at the head of the table, and the advisors began their reports on security updates, international concerns, and policy changes. Michael moved quietly, collecting used cups and placing fresh water on the table. He listened without meaning to, his mind drifting between the serious voices in the room and thoughts of Emily. As the reports dragged on, General Adams occasionally glanced at him. She saw how carefully he worked, how respectfully he carried himself. She had seen many men lose their sense of purpose after service, but in Michael she saw someone who carried quiet dignity, even in a role that many would find beneath them. When the meeting finally ended, chairs scraped back and officials gathered their papers. Michael moved quickly to clear the table, wanting to finish and leave unnoticed, but once again General Adams's voice stopped him. "Mr. Johnson," she called. He froze, then turned. "Yes, ma'am." "Walk with me." A few officers raised their brows in surprise. It was unusual for a general to invite a coffee aide to walk beside her. But Michael had no choice. He set the tray down and followed her out into the hallway. The corridor was wide and quiet, their footsteps echoing against the marble floor. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then General Adams broke the silence. "You didn't expect to be noticed today, did you?" she asked. Michael gave a faint smile, though it was tinged with weariness. "Not at all, ma'am. I've gotten used to blending in." She studied him from the corner of her eye. "That's a shame. Men like you shouldn't disappear into the background. You've done too much for that." Michael felt a pang in his chest. He remembered the missions, the nights spent under foreign skies, the brothers he had lost. But he also remembered Emily's small hand in his, the way she needed him more than the Navy ever had. He looked ahead, his voice quiet. "Sometimes disappearing is the only way to protect what matters most." The general nodded slowly. "Your daughter," she said as though reading his thoughts. "Yes, ma'am, Emily, she's 8. She's all I have." Something softened in General Adams's face. She too had sacrificed much for her career, though in different ways. She understood the weight of choosing duty and family. They reached the end of the hall where sunlight poured through tall windows. The general stopped and turned to face him. "Mr. Johnson, I don't know what life has put you through, but I see a man of honor standing here. Not everyone in this building deserves respect, but you do." Michael shifted uncomfortably. Praise was harder for him to accept than criticism. He gave a small nod, his voice low. "Thank you, ma'am. But I'm just doing what I can." Her eyes lingered on the ring again. "The trident is not something you just earn. It means you carried burdens most people can't even imagine, and I don't believe that part of you has disappeared." For the first time in a long while, Michael felt something stir inside him, a spark of the man he once was, a reminder that even if his life had changed, his worth had not vanished. The general gave him a final nod. "Take care of your daughter, Mr. Johnson. And remember, sometimes the world needs men who think they're finished." With that, she walked away, her boots clicking against the marble, leaving Michael standing in the sunlight, the empty tray forgotten at his side. For years he had lived as a shadow. But now, because one woman had noticed a small ring on his hand, the shadow felt a little less heavy, and for the first time in a long time, Michael wondered if his story was not yet over. Michael Johnson returned home late that evening, the sound of his daughter's laughter filling the small apartment before he even opened the door. Emily ran to him the moment he stepped inside, her little arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "Daddy, you're home," she said, her voice bubbling with joy. Michael dropped his worn bag by the door and lifted her into his arms, pressing his cheek against her golden hair. "Of course, sweetheart. I promised, didn't I?" She nodded eagerly, her blue eyes shining. On the table, crayons and papers were scattered, drawings of flowers, stick figures, and a small house labeled home. Michael's chest tightened. This was the reason he endured every quiet humiliation, every long day of being overlooked. She was his world. He set her down gently and asked, "Did you eat dinner?" "Yes," Emily said proudly. "I even finished my homework. Can we read tonight?" "Always," Michael promised with a soft smile. But as the night grew quiet, after Emily had fallen asleep with her small hand resting against his arm, Michael's thoughts drifted back to the moment in the briefing room. He could still hear General Laura Adams's voice, still feel the weight of her words. Men like you shouldn't disappear into the background. For years, he had accepted that his time of service was over, that his identity now was just Emily's dad, and the man who serves coffee. Yet the general's sharp eyes and firm tone had stirred something inside him he thought was gone. The sense of being seen, respected, valued. The following morning, Michael returned to the Defense Department. He walked the halls with his usual calm, carrying folders and trays, moving quietly around the officers and advisors. Most still paid him no mind, though a few now looked at him differently. News traveled fast in military circles, and whispers of "that aide used to be a SEAL" had already begun. Colonel Harris avoided his gaze, his earlier sharp words now a quiet embarrassment. Michael didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Life had taught him that pride was less important than peace. As he was setting down files in an office, a voice called his name. "Mr. Johnson." Michael turned. Standing in the doorway was General Adams herself. She was not surrounded by officers or advisors this time, just her commanding presence alone. "Yes, ma'am," Michael asked, his posture instinctively straightening. "I'd like to speak with you. Walk with me." They moved through the corridors together, drawing curious glances from those they passed. Michael kept his expression neutral, though inside he wondered what the general wanted. Finally, she stopped in a small conference room. It was quiet, far from the rush of the main hall. She gestured for him to sit. "Tell me about your service," she said simply. Michael hesitated. He had not spoken of his years in the teams in a long time. The memories were heavy and many were painful, but there was something steady in her gaze that told him she wasn't asking to judge him or to glorify him. She truly wanted to understand. "I joined young," Michael began. "Trained hard. Became part of the teams. We went places most people never hear about. Did things that never made the news. 12 years. Some of the best and worst years of my life." General Adams listened quietly, her hands folded on the table. Michael's voice grew softer. "I left when Anna, my wife, got sick. I tried to balance both, but the Navy needed me in one world and she needed me in another. After she passed, I couldn't go back. Emily was just a baby then. She needed her father more than the country needed another soldier." He paused, looking down at his hands. They were scarred, calloused, strong, but they shook slightly as he remembered. General Adams spoke gently. "You chose your daughter." "Yes, ma'am," Michael said firmly. "It wasn't a hard choice." A small smile touched the general's lips. "That speaks more of your strength than anything written in a report." For a moment the room was silent. Michael felt lighter, as though speaking those words aloud had released a burden he had carried too long in silence. Then the general leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Johnson, I won't pretend to know all your battles. But I know this, you're not finished. You may think your life is just about making ends meet now, but the qualities that made you a SEAL don't disappear. They stay. And they're needed more than ever." Michael frowned slightly. "With respect, ma'am, I'm just trying to raise my daughter. That's all that matters now." The general nodded. "And that's honorable. But sometimes the world finds us again, even when we think we've walked away. When it does, we have to decide if we'll answer." Her words echoed in Michael's mind long after she left. That evening, Michael sat with Emily at the dinner table. She was talking excitedly about her day at school, about the art project she had made and the story her teacher read aloud. Michael listened, smiling, but in the back of his mind the general's words replayed. "You're not finished." After Emily went to bed, Michael sat alone in the quiet apartment. He opened a small box he rarely touched. Inside was his old Navy SEAL uniform patch, a photo of his team, and a folded American flag. At the bottom was his trident ring, worn from years of service. He turned it slowly in his hand, remembering faces, voices, places he would never forget. He whispered to himself, "I'm just a dad now. That's enough." But deep down he wondered if fate had other plans. The next week Michael continued his work as usual. Yet something had changed. People noticed him more. Some greeted him with respect they hadn't shown before. And every so often he caught General Adams watching him with a look that suggested she was measuring him, as though she saw something others didn't. One afternoon, as he was leaving the building, she approached him again. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice steady, "I want you to come to my office tomorrow morning. I have something I think you should hear." Michael blinked, surprised. "Yes, ma'am." That night he tucked Emily into bed and kissed her forehead. She looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy, are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. He smiled gently, brushing her hair back. "I'm happy when I'm with you." She smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. But as Michael sat beside her until she slept, he thought about her question. Was he happy? Or had he simply learned to live quietly, forgetting the man he once was? The next morning, when he walked into General Adams' office, he was not sure what to expect. But something told him that whatever she had to say would change the course of his life again. And for the first time in years, Michael felt both nervous and hopeful, two feelings he thought had long left his heart. The following morning, Michael Johnson walked the familiar halls of the Defense Department with a heaviness in his chest. His footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors, his plain shirt neatly tucked in, his face calm as always. But inside, his mind was full of questions. General Laura Adams had told him to come to her office. She hadn't explained why, and Michael had spent most of the night wondering. What could a general want from a man like him, a former Navy SEAL turned coffee aide? He thought of Emily as he approached the door. Her sleepy voice from the night before still lingered in his ears. "Daddy, are you happy?" He had answered with a smile, but deep inside he wasn't sure anymore. He straightened his shoulders, knocked gently, and stepped inside. General Adams's office was spacious, but not overly decorated. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with military history, strategy, and framed photographs of soldiers she had served with. A large American flag stood tall behind her desk. She looked up from her papers as Michael entered. "Mr. Johnson," she said firmly. "Have a seat." Michael sat across from her, his posture straight but not stiff. He had learned long ago to show respect without showing weakness. The general studied him for a long moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about you since our last conversation." Michael gave a small nod, unsure what to say. "You served this country with distinction," she continued. "And then you walked away when your daughter needed you most. That was not weakness, it was strength. But now I see a man who has much more to give if he chooses." Michael's brows furrowed slightly. "With respect, ma'am, I'm not looking to return. My life is with Emily now. She's my mission." General Adams leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp yet kind. "And that's honorable. But sometimes missions overlap. What I'm about to tell you is not public knowledge. I need people I can trust. I need people who understand sacrifice, discipline, and loyalty. And when I saw that ring on your hand, I knew you were one of them." Michael's chest tightened. He had not expected this. "What are you asking me, General?" She opened a folder on her desk and slid it toward him. Inside were reports, photographs, and maps. "We're facing a problem. Details are classified, but the short version is this. We need someone with experience, someone who knows how to think under pressure. Not in the field this time, but here, behind the scenes. You'd be helping us evaluate situations, advising, and sometimes stepping in when others can't. I don't offer this lightly. I see potential in you, Mr. Johnson. You're wasted carrying coffee trays." Michael looked down at the folder, though he didn't touch it. His heart pounded. Part of him wanted to close it immediately, to walk away. He had built his life on silence and simplicity. But another part, the part of him that had once been proud to wear the trident, stirred at her words. "I don't know," he said slowly. "It's been years. I've built a different life now. My daughter needs stability. I can't risk losing her by being pulled into something dangerous again." General Adams nodded. "I respect that. And I'm not asking you to abandon her. This isn't deployment. It's not about leaving for months on end. It's about using your mind, your instincts, your training, right here. Think of it as a new kind of service." Michael was quiet for a long time. He thought of Emily, her laughter, her drawings, her question about his happiness. He thought of the life they had built, simple but safe. But he also thought of the empty feeling he carried, the part of himself that had been buried since he left the SEALs. "Why me?" he finally asked. The general's voice was steady. "Because men like you don't come around often. And when they do, we can't afford to let them fade into the background." Her words echoed in his mind. "Men like you don't come around often." Michael exhaled slowly, running his hand across his jaw. "I'll think about it, ma'am." "That's all I ask," General Adams said. That evening, Michael returned home to Emily. She ran to him as always, her little arms clinging to him like he was the most important person in the world. And to her he was. They ate dinner together, Emily talking about her school day with excitement. But Michael was quieter than usual, his thoughts heavy. After dinner, as Emily colored at the table, Michael sat across from her. "Sweetheart," he began gently, "what do you think about Daddy's job?" She looked up with wide blue eyes. "You bring papers and coffee, right?" Michael smiled faintly. "That's right," Emily tilted her head. "Do you like it?" Michael hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "Not really. But it helps us." Emily thought for a moment. Then she said softly, "I think you should do something that makes you happy too, Daddy." Her words pierced him deeper than any speech could have. Out of the mouths of children came the truths adults were too afraid to face. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, Michael sat in the small living room with the folder General Adams had given him. He opened it slowly, scanning the pages. He didn't understand everything, but he could see enough. The threats were real, the stakes were high, and the need for capable people was urgent. He closed the folder, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. He felt torn in two. One part of him wanted nothing more than to keep life simple for Emily's sake. The other part longed to feel alive again, to serve with purpose, to prove he was not finished. The next day, Michael returned to the building. He expected to slip back into his routine, but whispers followed him again. People had begun to talk about the general speaking with him, about the mysterious folder. As he passed by Colonel Harris, the man gave him a quick nod, one that carried respect rather than dismissal. It was small, but it told Michael things were changing. When he reached his small workspace, he found a note waiting for him. It was short, written in the general's firm handwriting. "Remember who you are." Michael held the note for a long moment, his chest heavy with thought. That night, as Emily lay asleep, Michael stood by her bedside. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his heart swelling with love. "Everything I do is for you," he whispered. But deep inside, he realized that maybe doing something for himself, finding purpose again, would also be for her. If she grew up seeing her father live only in the shadows, what lesson would that teach her? The decision was not easy, but Michael knew it was coming. The world had found him again, and he could not ignore it forever. And though fear lingered, so did something else, hope. For the first time in years, Michael Johnson felt the path ahead opening, uncertain but full of meaning. Michael Johnson sat alone in the small living room, the folder General Adams had given him resting on the coffee table. The lamp cast a soft glow across the room, highlighting the old photographs on the wall. Pictures of Anna holding baby Emily, photos of Michael in uniform with his teammates, and Emily's recent school drawings pinned beside them. The quiet tick of the clock was the only sound. He opened the folder again. Maps, reports, photographs of troubled regions, things most civilians would never see. He read slowly, his mind sharp despite the years away. His instincts, the same ones honed in combat, stirred as he studied the material. He could almost feel himself slipping back into that role, the man who looked at problems not with fear but with strategy. But then he looked toward Emily's bedroom door. Behind it, his daughter slept peacefully, clutching her stuffed bear. For her, the world was simple: school, crayons, bedtime stories. For her, he wanted safety, not uncertainty. Michael leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. "What do I do?" he whispered into the empty room. The next morning, Michael walked Emily to school. Her small hand clung to his, her steps bouncing as she hummed a tune. She talked about her class, about the art fair coming next week, about how she wanted him to come see her painting. "I'll be there," Michael promised firmly. "No matter what." She smiled up at him, trusting his words completely. That trust was both his strength and his burden. He couldn't let her down. After dropping her off, Michael stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the children run inside the school. He remembered the battlefields he had once walked, the sound of gunfire, the weight of life and death on his shoulders. Now his battlefield was here, making choices that would shape his daughter's future. Later that day, Michael returned to the Defense Department. He carried his usual tray of coffee cups, his steps steady. But inside he felt different. He was no longer just going through the motions. The general's words, Emily's innocent question, and his own buried instincts were all colliding in his mind. As he entered a meeting room, he noticed the looks again. Some officers glanced at him with quiet respect. Colonel Harris gave him a curt nod, one that acknowledged Michael was not just the aide anymore. The whispers had spread further now. After the meeting ended, General Adams approached him. "Mr. Johnson, have you thought about what I said?" Michael nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. Every night, every morning, and—" She pressed. Michael exhaled. "I don't know how to balance it. I want to serve again. I feel it inside me. But my daughter, she's everything. I can't risk losing her stability." General Adams studied him carefully. "No one is asking you to abandon her. What I'm offering is work that keeps you here. Advisory, strategic. The hours will be different, yes, but it won't take you away from her the way deployment would. You'd still be home every night." Michael's eyes softened. "Advisory?" "Yes," she confirmed. "But not just advisory. There may be moments when we need someone who can think like a SEAL, who can notice things others miss, who can stay calm when others panic. That's why I thought of you." Michael looked down for a long moment. His heart was heavy, but in that heaviness was also a spark. "If I do this, it has to be with conditions." The general raised a brow. "Conditions?" "Yes," he said firmly. Emily comes first. If anything threatens her, if this job ever risks her safety or my ability to care for her, I walk away. No questions asked. General Adams gave a rare smile. That sounds like the words of a man who knows his priorities. I can respect that. That evening, Michael sat with Emily at the dinner table. She ate happily, swinging her feet under the chair as she told him about her art fair. "Daddy, you'll come, right?" she asked again. Michael reached across the table, holding her small hand in his. "Sweetheart, I'll always be there." "I promise." Emily's smile widened. "Then you can see my painting. It's of us. You and me. At home." Michael's throat tightened. For her, home was safety, love, and his presence. He could never let her lose that. After she went to bed, Michael sat again with the folder. This time, instead of fear, he felt clarity. He realized something important. Serving again did not mean losing Emily. If he chose wisely, it could mean building a future she would be proud of. The next day, Michael requested a private meeting with General Adams. When he entered her office, she looked up, her sharp gaze steady. "You've made a decision," she said. Reading his face, Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'll do it, but I do it on my terms. Emily always comes first." General Adams stood and extended her hand. "Understood. Welcome back, Mr. Johnson." He shook her hand firmly, a sense of strength flooding through him. It wasn't the same as stepping onto a battlefield, but it carried its own weight. The days that followed were unlike anything Michael expected. He was no longer carrying trays of coffee. Instead, he sat in smaller strategy sessions, listening, analyzing, and occasionally offering his perspective. At first, some doubted him. After all, he had been the man pouring coffee only weeks ago. But slowly, his insights began to impress them. One afternoon, during a heated debate about security risks, Michael spoke up. His analysis was clear, sharp, and precise. The room grew quiet as his words cut through the noise. When he finished, even the skeptics nodded in agreement. General Adams gave him a look of approval, one that reminded him he was right where he was supposed to be. At home, Emily noticed the change too. "Daddy, you smile more now," she said one evening as they read her bedtime story. Michael chuckled softly. "Do I?" "Yes," she said seriously. "I like it." He kissed her forehead, his heart swelling. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." But with new purpose came new challenges. One night, as he worked late on reports, Michael felt the old pressure return, the weight of responsibility, the awareness that lives could depend on his judgment. He pushed through it, reminding himself of Emily asleep in the next room. The balance wasn't easy. Some nights he questioned if he had made the right choice. But then Emily's laughter would fill the apartment. Or she would hand him one of her drawings with the words "Daddy and me" written on it. And he knew this was the right path. Weeks later, the art fair arrived. Michael walked into the school gym, dressed neatly, carrying a small camera to capture the moment. Emily ran to him, her face glowing. "Daddy, come see," she said, pulling him toward her painting. It was simple but beautiful. A picture of a small house with a man and a little girl holding hands in front of it. Above them was a bright blue sky, and under the painting were the words, "Home is Daddy." Michael felt his eyes sting as he looked at it. He knelt beside Emily, hugging her tightly. "It's perfect," he whispered. In that moment, he realized something. Serving again didn't take him away from her. It gave her a father who felt alive, strong, and full of purpose. And that was the greatest gift he could give her. Michael Johnson had made his decision. He was no longer just the man who served coffee. He was a father, a protector, and once again, a man who carried the spirit of a SEAL, this time not for himself, but for the little girl who called him home. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Defense Department, illuminating the polished marble floors. Michael Johnson walked through the halls with a steady stride, no longer the quiet man who had carried coffee trays. Today, he carried folders, a tablet, and the presence of someone whose expertise mattered. It had been weeks since General Laura Adams had invited him back into active service, not on the battlefield, but in strategic operations. Each day brought new challenges, requiring the sharpness of mind and calm under pressure that only a former Navy SEAL could provide. He had thrown himself into the work, balancing responsibilities for Emily with his duties in the office. The weight of his past no longer crushed him. Instead, it guided him. Michael paused outside the briefing room, listening to voices inside. Discussions about logistics, security, and strategy filled the space, often loud and tense. He reminded himself to breathe, to approach calmly just as he had done in far more dangerous circumstances. His instincts told him when to speak, when to listen, and when to act. General Adams caught his eye from the head of the table. She gave a small nod, acknowledging his presence. Michael returned it with a subtle smile, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. Inside the room, the atmosphere was charged. Officers debated plans, analysts shared updates, and advisors pushed their opinions. Michael listened carefully, taking mental notes, observing body language, and evaluating information quickly. Then, as a tense moment arose over a potential security risk, he spoke. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, "if we approach it this way, we can minimize exposure while maintaining operational control. Otherwise, the plan could leave us vulnerable in an area we cannot monitor properly." The room quieted. Eyes turned toward him. Officers who had doubted him earlier now leaned in. He outlined his reasoning clearly, pointing out overlooked details and potential outcomes. By the time he finished, nods of agreement spread across the table. General Adams smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly, but Michael caught it. The respect in her eyes was unmistakable. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not for the praise, but for knowing he had contributed meaningfully once again. By midday, Michael's phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Daddy, can we have ice cream after school?" "Love you," he smiled. She was his anchor, the reason every decision he made mattered. Balancing work and family wasn't easy, but moments like these reminded him that his choices were right. During lunch, he stepped outside to call her. Emily answered immediately, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, Daddy," she exclaimed. "Hi, Pumpkin. Are you having a good day?" Michael asked,